You paid their bills for years, but you're not a real son. Only your brother, the soccer player, deserves the inheritance. So I left. Years later, when they went broke, they came begging, but I was already gone. I always knew I wasn't the favorite. Since we were kids, it was obvious. My younger brother, Ryan, was the golden child. He was the one my father bragged about, the one who never did anything wrong. Even when we were little, it was clear that Ryan had something I never did: the admiration of our parents. And it all got worse when he started playing soccer. My father had always dreamed of having an athlete in the family. He'd played a bit in high school before an injury sidelined him, and ever since it became his life's mission to raise a soccer star. So when Ryan showed interest in the sport, my father put everything into him. Coaches, classes, new equipment every season. Meanwhile, I was the one working after school to help pay the bills. You kids never complain. You'll never go through what I went through. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to make sure we had what we needed. And not just us. Every month I sent money to my parents, covering part of their mortgage, paying for their groceries. I never asked for anything in return, but they still treated me like I was nothing. At family dinners, my father would go on and on about Ryan's career. Even though he wasn't even playing on a great team, it didn't matter. He was a soccer player, and that made him special in my father's eyes. His kids went to the best schools, had the best clothes, and were always praised. My kids. It was like they didn't exist. One night, my daughter tried to tell my parents about her victory in an academic competition. She'd worked so hard, beating hundreds of kids, and she was beaming with pride. But before she could finish her sentence, my father turned to Ryan's son and asked, "How's soccer going? Got any big games coming up?" Her joy vanished instantly. I saw how her face fell, how she slumped back in her chair and picked at the food on her plate in silence. And something inside me broke. I'd spent years trying to earn their respect, sacrificing my time, my money, my energy. For what? To be treated like I was invisible? Like my children didn't matter? And then my grandfather, who'd been silent all night, leaned back and said the words that sealed everything for me. "My legacy," he said, swirling his glass of whiskey, "will only go to the part of the family that deserves it. A last name like ours shouldn't be wasted on a nobody." Then he turned to me, smiling in that cold, dismissive way. "You work, sure. But what will people remember you for? A simple job? A boring life?" And then he said it. "You don't deserve our last name." The table fell silent. I felt my wife's hand squeeze mine under the table. I looked at my children, saw how my daughter's lip trembled, how my son stared fixedly at his plate, too hurt to even look up. I should be used to it by now, being ignored, belittled, treated like I was just a worker, not a son. But when my grandfather looked me in the eyes and told me I wasn't worthy of our family, something inside me snapped. But let's go back to the beginning, to where it all started. While Ryan trained on the field, I unloaded boxes at Thompson Crosser after school. Not allowed to dream because I had to survive. When I grew up and got a stable job, my parents didn't congratulate me. They didn't tell me they were proud. They just saw me as their safety net. Every raise I got wasn't a cause for celebration, just a sign that I could now send them more money. "You're our son," my mother would say. "Family helps each other out." It sounded noble, except the help only went one way. I supported them. Every month I sent money home, covered bills, bought groceries, even bailed Ryan out when he needed it. They never thanked me. They just expected it. Ryan, by the way, never really worked. He played for a third-rate soccer club, the Ohio Thunder, which barely paid him enough to survive. But to my father, he was a hero. When Ryan needed a new car, guess who paid for it? Me. When his wife had a baby and they needed a bigger apartment, who covered part of the rent? Me. I kept telling myself I was doing it for the family, but the truth was they were just using me. The worst was family dinners. My grandfather always talked about our family's legacy, and how only those who deserved it would inherit anything. He'd turn to Ryan's kids and say, "These are real grandchildren. They're in the best schools. They have a great future. And my kids?" He never mentioned them. One night, my daughter, beaming with pride, announced her victory in an academic competition. But before she could finish, my father looked away and asked Ryan's son, "How's soccer? Got any big games coming up?" The light in my daughter's eyes went out, and she fell silent. I clenched my jaw and said nothing. I'd long since accepted that I would never be enough for them. but seeing them ignore my kids, that was different. And then the final straw. My grandfather swirled his glass of whiskey with a sneer. The family name belongs to those who enhance it, not those who waste their lives. Then he looked directly at me and added, "You work, sure, but what will people remember you for? A simple job? A boring life? You'll leave no mark on this world." And then the final words that pushed me over the edge. "You don't deserve our last name." The table fell into absolute silence. I looked at my parents, and the worst part? They said nothing in my defense. That night I barely slept. I lay staring at the ceiling, my grandfather's words echoing in my head over and over again. "You don't deserve our last name." It wasn't just what he'd said. It was the fact that nobody at the table had defended me. Not my mother, not my father, not even my brother. After everything I'd done for them, years of sacrifice, time, money, effort. For what? To be ignored? To be used? I had spent my entire life working, sacrificing, never hearing a word of appreciation, not a single moment of acknowledgement. They didn't even respect me enough to pretend to care. I thought about my children, how my daughter had been so proud to share her accomplishment, only to be disregarded like she was invisible. I thought about my son, who barely spoke at family gatherings because he knew nobody would listen. They weren't just disrespecting me, they were disrespecting my children too. And I wasn't going to allow it anymore. The next morning I made a decision. I wasn't sending them another dollar. For years I'd helped them without question. I paid my parents' groceries, covered their bills, and even gave Ryan money whenever he needed it. But no more. I didn't tell them right away. I wanted them to feel it. First, they didn't even notice. The first month passed without anyone commenting. I assumed they thought I'd forgotten or that I'd send double the next time. Then the phone calls started. The first was from my mother. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice saccharinely sweet, too sweet. "I think there was a mistake at the bank. We didn't receive your deposit this month." I took a deep breath. "There was no mistake, Mom. I'm not sending money anymore." Silence. Then a forced laugh. "Oh, come on, don't be silly. In this family, we all help each other out." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "I help you out. None of you have ever helped me." Her voice instantly turned cold. "This is because of what your grandfather said? Don't be so sensitive. You know how he is. He's from a different time." "I don't care," I replied. "You all stayed silent. You didn't try to defend me. You didn't even try." She scoffed. "So you're punishing us by withholding money? How childish." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just tired of being used." She tried to say something else, but I hung up before she could. 2 days later, my father called. He didn't waste time pretending to be nice. "Cut the crap. Send the money. We need it." "I don't care what you need," I replied calmly. "Figure it out." He huffed in disbelief. "We raised you, we took care of you, and this is how you repay us?" "You didn't raise me," I retorted. "I raised myself." A heavy silence. Then in a clipped, biting tone he said, "You failed us." I smiled. "Good. That means for the first time in my life, I'm doing something right." And I hung up again. Then Ryan called. I'd been expecting him. Unlike my parents, he wasn't the shouting type. He was more manipulative. Always the charmer. Always the golden child. He knew exactly which words to use to get what he wanted. "Hey bro," he said casually, as if we hadn't gone a month without speaking. "Heard about this whole money thing." I said nothing. Waited for him to get to the point. "Look, I get it," he continued. "You're upset, but you can't just cut Mom and Dad off like that. They're struggling." I almost laughed. Struggling? My mother had just posted pictures of a weekend at a spa. My father had just bought a new fishing boat. Ryan hesitated. "Well, yeah, but, they need you. And to be honest, I've been having a rough time financially too." There it was. "And that's my problem because?" I asked. "Come on, man," he sighed. "We're family. We're supposed to support each other." "Oh yeah," I said. "Have you ever supported me? Ever?" Silence. "I'm serious, Ryan. Tell me one time you've had my back. One time you've helped me. One time you've made a sacrifice for me like the ones I've made for you." He had no answer. "Yeah," I said. "That's what I thought. You're being selfish, he snapped, his tone shifting from friendly to annoyed.
No, he replied calmly.
I was selfless for years. Now I'm simply done. Fine, he said, his voice turning cold. You want to act like this? Don't expect to be invited to any more family events. I let out a dry laugh. Ryan, let's be honest, I was never really invited in the first place. And with that, I ended the call. The next few weeks were eerily silent. No calls, no emotional blackmail, no fake pleasantries. I expected them to try harder, to keep pushing. I figured they had given up. I was wrong. One night, my wife and I were having dinner when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my cousin. Have you seen the family chat? I frowned and opened it. The first thing I saw was a long message from my father, sent to the entire family. It breaks our hearts to say that our eldest son has turned his back on us, after all we've done for him. He's abandoned his family, refusing to help us in our time of need. We raised him with love, and this is how he repays us. A true disappointment. We are fortunate to have Ryan, who understands the true value of family. But as for our other son, he is no longer part of this family. My hands balled into fists. They were trying to shame me. They wanted to turn the whole family against me, make me look like the villain. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. My wife took my hand and squeezed it gently. Don't let it get to you, she exhaled slowly. They want a reaction. They're not going to get one. I turned off my phone and placed it face down on the table. Let them talk. Let them spread their lies. I didn't care anymore. I was finally free. At first I thought the silence meant they'd accepted their defeat. That maybe, just maybe, they finally understood that I wasn't their ATM anymore. I was wrong. Started with small things. My father stopped acknowledging me at family gatherings. If we were in the same room, he would talk to everyone except me. My mother, always the queen of passive-aggressive digs, started posting dramatic messages online about how hard it is when your own child turns their back on you. Ryan, of course, continued to play the role of the golden child, calling my parents every day, posting pictures of himself helping dad with things around the house, taking mom to lunch. All the things I'd done for years without so much as a simple thank you. And then one day my grandfather died. The moment I got the news, I knew what would come next. The funeral was a grand affair. Exactly how he would have liked it. The entire extended family was there. Relatives I hadn't seen in years, family friends, even some people from his business days. I kept to the sidelines. I wasn't there to cause a scene. I wasn't there to rekindle any relationships. I just wanted to pay my respects and leave. But my family had other plans. After the service, when everyone gathered at my parents' house, Ryan approached me with a smug smile. So, he said, swirling his glass. I'm guessing you heard about the will? I hadn't. I didn't need to. I already knew what was coming. Let me guess, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Grandfather left everything to you. Ryan smirked. Not everything. Mom and Dad get a good chunk too. You? Not a penny. I nodded. As expected. You're not even upset? He asked, clearly expecting a reaction. I shrugged. Why would I be? I never wanted his money. And it was the truth. What hurt wasn't the inheritance. It was the principle. It was the final confirmation that in my family's eyes, I had never been enough. I was about to leave when my mother called from across the room. Wait. Before you go. We need to talk. I let out a sigh but turned around. About what? She exchanged a look with my father. He didn't seem pleased, but he nodded for her to continue. We think it's time to put the past behind us, she said, clasping her hands together as if she were making some grand gesture of reconciliation. Start over. As a family. I looked at her, waiting for the catch. Because there was always a catch. Ryan cleared his throat. Dad and I were talking, and we think you should reconsider this whole cutting us off thing. There it was. Reconsider. I asked, tilting my head. My father finally spoke. Look, your brother's been doing great things for the family, but times are tough. You've got a stable job, a good salary. It's time you started helping out again. I laughed right in their faces. They all stiffened. You really think I'm that stupid? I said, shaking my head. Grandfather leaves me nothing. You cut me out of your lives for months, and suddenly I'm supposed to step up? My mother sighed, as if she were the one suffering here. We're not saying you have to do everything. Just help out a little. Family is supposed to support each other. I crossed my arms. Did Ryan help out when I was struggling? Silence. Did any of you? More silence. That's what I thought, I said. So here's my answer. No. Not a penny. Not a favor. Nothing. My father's jaw tightened. We raised you. We took care of you. You raised me. I let out a bitter laugh.
No.
You raised Ryan. I was just there. And you know what? That's fine. I survived without your help before. But you? You won't survive without mine. I turned to leave. Ryan stepped in my way. You're really going to do this? He asked, his voice no longer arrogant but frustrated. You're going to walk away from your own family over money? I looked him in the eye. No, Ryan. You walked away from me a long time ago. I'm just finally accepting it. And then I left. For good. The following weeks the calls came. First from my mother, then my father, then Ryan. I ignored them all. They tried everything. Guilt, anger, even pleas. But I had made my decision. One day I got a text from Ryan. Ryan, are you really going to let mom and dad suffer? I'm not. They're not suffering. They're just angry that I'm not supporting them anymore. Ryan, you're being selfish. I am. For the first time in my life. And it feels amazing. I never heard from him again. And that was it. For the first time in my life I was truly free. No more obligations. No more guilt. No more being the one who always had to give, without ever receiving anything in return. They didn't disinherit me. They liberated me. It had been a year since I walked away. At first it felt strange, like I was waiting for something to happen. For another shoe to drop at any moment. After so many years of being the person everyone depended on, the silence felt unnatural. I wasn't used to being left alone. But then slowly I started to notice the changes. For the first time my paycheck was mine. It wasn't draining out of my account every month to cover my parents' bills, to fund Ryan's lifestyle, to make sure everyone was okay except me. For the first time my home felt peaceful. My wife and I started to spend real time together, without me constantly being caught up in family drama. My children. God, my children flourished. My daughter no longer hesitated before speaking. My son no longer sat silently waiting to be ignored. We were finally a family. A real family. And I was finally free. Then one afternoon my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me hesitate. Against my better judgment, I swiped to answer. Ryan, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I thought you should know. Dad's sick. It's bad. I stared at the words for a long moment. I expected to feel something. Guilt, sadness, anger. Instead I felt nothing. Because the truth was, I'd already mourned the loss of my father. Not in his death but in his life. I'd mourned for the father I wished I'd had. The one who would have loved me. The one who would have respected me. The one who would have seen me as more than a wallet. But that father never existed. The man who raised me made it clear time and time again that I was never his priority. That I was never someone to admire or respect. And now that he was dying, I was supposed to rush back? For what? To be disregarded one last time? A few days later Ryan called. I let it go to voicemail. He left a short, curt message. He wants to see you. That was it.
No επάλεγη.
No acknowledgement of how they treated me. Just an expectation. Because in their minds, no matter how far I'd gone, I would always come back when they called. I deleted the message. I didn't respond. And life went on. A few months later my father passed away. I didn't go to the funeral. Some people would say I was heartless for that. Maybe I was. Or maybe I'd simply learned to put myself first for once. I wasn't thinking about what was expected of me, what I should do to keep the peace. I was thinking about my family. My well-being. All the years I'd spent being last. Ryan, you didn't even show up. You really are selfish. I learned from the best. After that, nothing. And that was it. The final chapter. The last loose thread cut. I thought I would feel remorse, that I would question myself. But I didn't. If anything, I felt lighter, like I'd finally shed the last weight of my past. The last tie to a family that was never really mine. My family wasn't them. It was my wife. It was my children, the people who truly loved me, and I would never make them feel the way they made me feel. I would never allow my daughter to feel invisible. I would never let my son feel like he was a second choice. I would never make them believe they had to earn my love, because that's what a real family means. And for the first time in my life, I finally had one.